90 missiles fired in one single night, not by any superpower with endless carriers or invisible bombers, but by a country the world had written off as crippled, outmatched, and backed into a corner. And while those warheads lit up the skies over Tel Aviv, a nightmare that military planners in Washington, Jerusalem, and every Gulf capital had been whispering about for years, finally came true. Israel's legendary layered air defense shield, the most advanced ever engineered, began running dry on interceptors. The defensive arsenal was exhausted, and right now the question gripping the planet isn't whether Israel can survive the next barrage. It's whether the entire global economy can survive what Iran has already done to the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to break down this entire crisis step by step, because what's exploding across the Middle East right now isn't just another regional war. It's the single biggest geopolitical and economic earthquake of the 21st century. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why the price of everything you buy is about to skyrocket, why the world's energy markets are on the brink of total meltdown, and why a narrow 21-mile stretch of water has suddenly become the most dangerous shipping lane on Earth. To truly grasp what just slammed Tel Aviv, we first have to rewind to how we even reached this point. Because this war didn't begin with rockets in the sky. It started with a phone call, a fatal miscalculation, and one decision that flipped the entire board. In the opening weeks of 2026, Iran and the United States were actually at the table. Indirect nuclear talks were underway in Oman. Iran's top diplomat publicly said a landmark deal was within reach. Diplomats on both sides allowed themselves a flicker of hope that the decades-long standoff might finally ease. Then the rug was yanked away on February 24th during the State of the Union. President Donald Trump stood in front of Congress and accused Iran of secretly restarting its nuclear weapons program and building long-range missiles that could threaten Europe and U.S. bases worldwide. He issued a blunt warning. 4 days later, on February 28th, the United States and Israel launched coordinated surprise airstrikes deep inside Iran. In one lightning operation, they eliminated Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and dozens of the Islamic Republic's highest military commanders. The regime that had ruled Iran for decades, lost its entire top leadership in a matter of hours. Everyone expected Iran to hit back. Nobody imagined the speed, the accuracy, or the sheer scale of what followed. Within hours, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched what they called Operation True Promise 4. Unlike earlier Iranian salvos that were mostly for show and easily knocked down, this one was built for a completely different goal. On day one alone, Iran hurled 90 ballistic missiles straight at Israel, 90 in a single synchronized wave aimed at the country's busiest population corridor, stretching from Tel Aviv through central Israel all the way toward Jerusalem. The Iron Dome, David Sling and Arrow systems, Israel's three-tiered missile shield, were pushed to their absolute breaking point on the very first night. Interception rates stayed high, but Iran had done the cold math. Every single interceptor Israel fires is insanely expensive. An Arrow 3 missile runs between $2 and $3 million apiece. David Sling interceptors cost about $1 million each. Iron Dome rockets are $50,000 a shot. Meanwhile, Iran's cheap Shah drones cost only $20,000 to $50,000 to build. The math is merciless. Iran can flood the skies with low-cost weapons, while Israel is forced to burn through interceptors that cost 10, 20, even 50 times more. On a long enough timeline, that equation only ends one way. The interceptors run out long before the missiles do. By the 60th day of the war, that nightmare scenario stopped being theory and became reality. Israel quietly told Washington it was critically low on ballistic missile interceptors. The Israeli military publicly denied the leak and insisted they were fully prepared, but the very fact they felt the need to deny it spoke volumes. When a military is truly comfortable with its stockpiles, it doesn't issue statements, it just keeps silent. And while that quiet crisis was building inside Israel, Iran added a second brutal twist that made the interceptor problem 10 times worse. Picture yourself as an air defense operator staring at a missile screaming toward your city. You have seconds to decide. You launch an interceptor. The missile is destroyed in midair, and then the warhead splits open, not explodes, opens. Out spill 22, 24 separate bomblets, each the size of a hand grenade, spreading across a 10 km radius. Your multi-million-dollar interceptor may have taken out the carrier, but the payload is already falling, scattering, completely untouchable by any existing defense system. That's the cluster-munition nightmare that has haunted Israel since the opening hours. Israeli officials confirmed that roughly half of the nearly 300 ballistic missiles Iran fired in the first 10 days carried these cluster warheads. Half? That means for every 2 missiles launched, 1 was engineered specifically to make Israel's air defenses irrelevant. If the interceptor missed, the full warhead slammed home. If it hit, the bomblet still rained down anyway. Either outcome achieved Iran's goal, forcing millions of Israelis into shelters, burning through interceptor stocks at breakneck speed, and hammering the country with relentless psychological and economic pressure. The strategy was patient, calculated, and brutally effective. But while headlines fixated on sirens and shelter counts, the real heart of this war wasn't Tel Aviv. It was a narrow waterway at the southeastern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, the Strait of Hormuz. And what Iran did there on day 2 is what history will remember as the moment everything changed forever. On March 2nd, just 48 hours after the initial U.S. Israeli strikes, a senior URGK commander made a single announcement that sent every energy trader on the planet into freefall. He declared the Strait of Hormuz closed, not threatened, not watched, closed. Any ship linked to the United States, Israel, or their allies would be treated as a legitimate target and set on fire. Within 24 hours, tanker traffic through the strait plunged 70%. Within days, it fell to almost zero. Over 150 vessels dropped anchor on both sides, crews unsure when or if they would ever move again. Some are still waiting right now. The ripple effects hit the global economy faster and harder than even the most pessimistic models predicted. On a normal day, 20 million barrels of crude oil, 1/5 of the entire planet's supply, flow through that 21-meter-wide choke point. Another 1/5 of the world's liquefied natural gas follows the same route. 30% of Europe's jet fuel originates there. Petrochemicals, fertilizers, aluminum, steel, and consumer goods all ride the same corridor. Every single one of those supply chains slammed to a halt on March 2nd. Brent crude rocketed from around $65 a barrel to nearly $120 in days. It later settled near $13 after the International Energy Agency ordered the biggest emergency release in history, 400 million barrels. But even that move was little more than theater. Those reserves equal only about 20 days of normal Hormuz traffic. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve held roughly 415 million barrels. Together, they could cover maybe a month of global demand. After that, the world would be on its own. Then the pain moved downstream into every corner of daily life. Fertilizer prices exploded. URA jumped from $475 to $680 per ton almost overnight. 1/3 of global fertilizer trade normally passes through Hormuz. With planting season for corn and soybeans approaching in the American Midwest, analysts warned of direct food inflation hitting grocery stores by autumn. Supply chain bosses admitted that existing inventories for many commodities cover only a few weeks after that. Shortages would cascade across sectors. 85% of Middle East polyethylene exports travel the same route. A prolonged blockade would drive up costs for packaging, car parts, and everyday goods worldwide. Goldman Sachs raised the odds of a U.S. recession by 5 points to 25%. Oxford Economics modeled $140 oil for 2 months and concluded it would push the Eurozone, Britain, and Japan into outright contraction while freezing the American economy. The URG spokesman went further. openly predicting oil would hit $200 a barrel. The shipping industry simply walked away. Two of the world's biggest carriers suspended all Middle East routes. War risk insurance for the Strait was canceled entirely on March 5th, making transit financially suicidal for almost every owner. While Hormuz was being sealed and Tel Aviv absorbed nightly missile waves, Iran opened a third front that most coverage missed. The URG began striking American bases and every Gulf Arab state accused of helping the U.S. Israeli campaign. Bahrain's capital took multiple hits. The U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet headquarters in Japan was targeted repeatedly. Kuwait International Airport was damaged by drones. In the way, 10 missiles and drones slammed into Al Dhafra Air Base, while another drone struck inside Dubai's financial district. Black smoke rose over Fujr Port. Saudi Arabia intercepted missiles aimed at Al-Kharj and Riyadh. Qatar knocked down for ballistic missiles. Iraq saw explosions near Kirkuk. More than 50 Iranian drones crossed Saudi airspace in a single night. Even Turkish airspace saw Iranian ballistic missiles intercepted by NATO. The message to every Gulf capital was crystal clear. Your neutrality is an illusion. If you host U.S. planes, U.S. ships, or U.S. bases, you are a participant and you will pay the price. Saudi Arabia watched its eastern oil fields come under fire. The way saw smoke over its financial heart. Qatar, home to the massive Al Udeid base, found itself shooting down missiles aimed at the very infrastructure it depends on. None of these nations had prepared for the reality that Iran would no longer tolerate fence-sitting. The single most consequential strike of the entire conflict happened at Kharg Island, the Iranian oil terminal that handles roughly 90% of the country's crude exports. On March 14th, U.S. forces hit military targets there, but deliberately spared the oil facilities. President Trump stated the strikes were measured and warned that the oil infrastructure itself could be next if Iran kept blocking Hormuz. The new supreme leader, who took power after his father's death in the opening strikes, immediately vowed to keep the strait sealed and continue attacks on Gulf neighbors. His exact condition became one of the war's biggest mysteries. U.S. officials suggested he was wounded. Trump openly questioned whether he was even alive. Yet an Iranian leadership operating with decapitated command, degraded missile stocks, and an uncertain supreme leader somehow kept projecting power across the region. Missile launch rates dropped sharply after the first 2 weeks, but Iran had already achieved its main objectives. The strait was shut, the Gulf states were rattled, Israel's interceptor reserves were critically low, and the global economy was reeling. President Trump told NBC that Iran wanted a deal, but the terms weren't good enough. Hours later, Iran's foreign minister appeared on CBS and flatly rejected any ceasefire talk, saying Iran was prepared to defend itself indefinitely. While Trump scrambled to build a multinational naval coalition, reaching out to Japan, South Korea, China, France, Britain, Thailand, and India, the response was lukewarm. When pressed, U.S. officials couldn't name a single country that had actually committed ships. China wanted the oil flowing, but refused to align visibly with Washington. Europe faced a major energy crunch, yet hesitated. Legal complications under the law of the sea made military action in the strait risky without Iran and Oman's consent. So here we stand on day 16 of a war that began with diplomatic collapse and has become the worst global energy shock since the 1970s. Israel is rationing interceptors while still absorbing missiles and cluster bomblets. Gulf states are shooting down Iranian weapons over their own capitals, while quietly recalculating their alliances. Iran is fighting without most of its senior commanders, under a leader whose status remains unclear. Yet the strait stays closed, and 350 oil tankers sit idle. Fertilizer prices are spiking before planting season. Semiconductor plants in Asia face power cuts from LG shortages, and recession probabilities are rising in every major economic forecast. As Iran's conventional missile stocks dwindle, analysts warn its proxy networks in Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen could become even more active. The strait remains shut. Every extra day of blockade adds more pressure on global prices. Every day oil stays above $100 deepens inflation for ordinary families everywhere. Every day without a diplomatic off-ramp raises the risk of a wider miscalculation. This isn't just a military story anymore. It's an economic one. The decisions made in the coming days and weeks will reshape energy markets for years. A narrow strip of water has become the most important piece of real estate on the planet. The interceptors are running low. The tankers aren't moving. Oil is over $100 and climbing. The question no one can answer with confidence is the same one that started when the first strikes hit Iran on February 28. What does Iran do next? And what happens to the rest of us when it does? If you want to stay ahead of every twist in this fast-moving crisis and get clear, nonsense analysis delivered straight to you the moment things break, then do this right now. Smash that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and give this video a thumbs up if it helped you see the bigger picture. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the strait reopens soon? Or are we heading into even deeper trouble? Your engagement helps us keep bringing you updates like this every single day. For more than 20 years, Thrawn's planners watched America project power across the region. Carriers in the Gulf, bases multiplying, the military gap widening. No matter how hard Iran tried to